The golden uraeus upon my brow felt heavier than the massive limestone blocks dragging my lover to an early grave. Standing on the high balcony of the royal palace, overlooking the endless sands of Thebes, I watched the slaves toil under the merciless sun, their backs glistening with sweat and blood. Among them was Kael, the man who held my soul in his calloused, chain-bound hands. My heart hammered against my ribs like a war drum, terrifyingly loud in the silence of the court, threatening to expose the treason rotting beneath my fine linen robes. Every stolen glance between us was a crime against Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. To the world, I was the daughter of the living God, the jewel of the Nile, destined to marry a powerful high priest or a foreign king to secure our dynasty's borders. To touch a slave was not merely a scandal. It was an act of sacrilege that could topple the very foundations of the Pharaoh's authority. The penalty was not just death, but the erasure of one's name from the history of Egypt, condemning the spirit to wander endlessly in the duat. Yet the fear of the afterlife paled in comparison to the terror of the Grand Vizier's gaze. I could feel his eyes boring into my back, a predator waiting for the slightest slip in my composure. He suspected something. I could see it in the way he lingered near my chambers, questioning my handmaidens with a serpent's tongue. One wrong move, one whispered rumor, and Kael would be fed to the crocodiles of the Nile before the sun set. I gripped the cold stone of the balustrade until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream his name. The luxury surrounding me, the scent of myrrh, the polished alabaster floors, the servants bowing at my feet, felt like the walls of a gilded sarcophagus. I possessed the power to command armies and build monuments that would touch the sky, yet I was powerless to save the one man who saw the woman beneath the crown. This is not a story of gods and magic, but of a choice that could burn a kingdom to ash. I stood at the precipice of destiny, holding a dagger of truth that would either cut my chains or pierce my own heart. I was prepared to challenge the Pharaoh himself, even if it meant trading my throne for a life in the dust. My name is Amara, the first daughter of Pharaoh Ramses, born to rule over the two lands with an iron will and a heart sealed in gold. For 20 years, my life was a meticulously choreographed ritual of offerings, politics, and obedience. I was the embodiment of perfection, raised to believe that my blood was ichor and my word was law. But the gods have a cruel sense of humor, for they placed my destiny not in the stars, but in the mud of the construction pits. Kael was a prisoner of war, a man stripped of his name and dignity, forced to carve statues for a king who conquered his people. He possessed nothing but the strength of his spirit and a defiance that captivated me during a chance inspection of the temple grounds. In a world where everyone bowed and flattered, he was the only one who dared to look me in the eye, seeing not a goddess, but a trapped girl. Our love grew in the shadows of the colossal pillars of Karnak, fueled by stolen moments and silent whispers that defied the rigid hierarchy of our world. It was a fragile, dangerous thing, blooming like a lotus in a drought. But as the Pharaoh's health began to fail, the pressure for me to secure the succession intensified. The court demanded a marriage of power, and the ambitious nobility circled the throne like vultures. I found myself caught in a deadly web of intrigue, where my affection for a slave became a weapon in the hands of my enemies. The Grand Vizier, hungry for the crown, sought to use my secret to destroy my claim to the throne and seize power for himself. I was forced to navigate a labyrinth of lies, playing the role of the dutiful daughter while plotting a rebellion that started in my own heart. This narrative chronicles the collapse of my world and the birth of my true self. It is a testament to the terrible price of freedom and the devastating weight of a crown. Before the final stone is set and history judges my reign, you must understand that every decision I made was a battle between the duty I was born for and the love I would die for. The scent of lotus oil and frankincense is supposed to be soothing, a fragrance reserved for the gods and those who share their blood. To me, it smells like suffocation. I sat perfectly still on a stool of carved ebony, staring into the polished bronze mirror held by Merit, my most trusted handmaiden. Her hands were steady, but her eyes held a flicker of worry as she lined my eyes with kohl, the black paint extending outward to mimic the gaze of a falcon. It was not just makeup, it was a mask. The Amara who laughed, who feared, who bled, had to be buried beneath layers of linen and gold before she could step into the light of the palace. "The vizier has been asking for the schedule of your movements today, my lady," Merritt whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of chanting priests from the temple complex. She adjusted the heavy gold collar around my neck, the weight of it settling instantly on my collarbone. It was a beautiful piece, inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian, representing the protection of Hathor. It felt like a shackle. "Paser is a snake who thinks himself a crocodile," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Let him ask. I am the daughter of Ramses. I go where I please." "He is watching, Amara," she warned, dropping the formal titles in our privacy. "The rumors, they are like dust in a storm. They get everywhere." I met her gaze in the mirror. Merritt knew. She was the only one who knew. Then we must ensure he sees nothing but a pious daughter inspecting her father's monuments. I stood up, the sheer linen of my calloused rustling against my skin. I was ready. I looked every inch the future of the 19th dynasty, regal, untouchable, and cold. But beneath the ribs that the tight fabric constricted, my heart was already racing, not for the glory of Egypt, but for the man waiting in the dust of the quarry. Ursio. The great hypostyle hall was a forest of stone. Columns thick enough to require 10 men to circle them soared toward a ceiling painted with the stars of the night sky. The air here was cooler, heavy with the murmurs of scribes and the shuffling of sandals. My father, Pharaoh Ramses, sat upon the throne. He was a mountain of a man, a warrior king whose name made the Hittites tremble. But time conquers even mountains. I saw the tremor in his hand as he held the crook and flail, the slight graying of his skin that the court physicians tried desperately to hide with oils. He was dying. We all knew it, though to speak it was treason. To his right stood Paser, the Grand Vizier. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to lack eyelids, he watched the court with a predatory stillness. When I entered, his head turned slowly, a smile curling his thin lips that did not reach his eyes. "The Princess Amara," Paser announced, his voice smooth as oil. "The morning star of Thebes graces us." I bowed to my father, touching my forehead to the cool stone floor. Life, prosperity, health, majesty. "Rise, my daughter," Ramses said. His voice was a rumble of thunder, but distant now. "You intend to visit the western expansion today?" "Yes, father. The dedication of the new pylon for the Temple of Ammon requires my oversight. The people must see that the royal house is invested in their labor." It was a rehearsed lie, perfect in its piety. "Good," Ramses nodded, leaning back wearily. "The people need reminders of our strength, especially now." Paser stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "Indeed. Strength and continuity. The envoys from Assyria arrive in 3 days, Princess. They are eager to meet the woman who will secure the alliance." My stomach clenched. The alliance. A diplomatic marriage to a foreign prince I had never met, a man who likely viewed me as nothing more than a broodmare for a treaty. "I am aware of my duties, Vizier," I said, my voice sharp. "I am sure you are," Paser replied, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. "One must be careful not to be distracted by lesser things. The desert sun can play tricks on the eyes and on the heart. Best to stay in the shade, Princess." A chill ran down my spine. He knows. Or he suspects enough to bait me. I forced a smile, cold and imperious. "The sun is the source of our power, Paser. Only those who hide in the dark need fear it." I turned on my heel and walked away, my head held high, the golden ornaments jingling with a deceptive cheerfulness. I needed to get out. I needed air. The heat of the construction site was a physical blow, a wall of dry, dusty air that instantly coated the throat. Here there was no incense, only the smell of sweat, baking mud, and the sharp tang of copper chisels on limestone. Hundreds of men moved like ants, hauling massive sledges, their rhythmic grunts forming a song of agony and endurance. My chariot stopped at the perimeter. The guards formed a protective circle, pushing back the curious and the exhausted workers. I descended, holding a fan of ostrich feathers to my face, scanning the crowd. And then I saw him. Kael was hauling a basket of debris from the base of a statue. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed deep by the sun, glistening with sweat. Muscles corded along his back as he moved with a fluid grace that defied the brutality of his labor. He was a slave, a captive from the northern campaigns, yet he wore no defeat in his eyes. He looked up. Across the dust and the shouting overseers, our eyes locked. Time didn't stop. That is a poet's lie. But it focused. The noise of the quarry faded into a dull roar. In his gaze, I wasn't the princess, the political pawn, or the divine vessel. I was just Amara. He saw the fear I hid from Paser. He saw the exhaustion I hid from my father. I moved toward the overseer, feigning an inspection of the limestone quality. The overseer, a fat man named Beck, bowed so low his nose nearly touched the dirt. "My lady, an honor. The stone is flawless, the finest form." "Show me the reliefs on the south wall," I commanded, pointing toward a section of scaffolding that offered a sliver of shadow and privacy. As we walked, I signaled with a subtle flick of my wrist. It was a dangerous game, one we had played for months. Kael, carrying water skins now, moved to the same area to service the workers there, in the shadow of the massive unfinished wall, while Beck screamed at a clumsy scribe. Kael passed me. He didn't bow. He paused, just for a heartbeat, pretending to adjust his sandal. "The heavy collar suits you," he murmured, his voice rough with thirst but gentle. "But it looks heavy." "It is," I whispered back, not looking at him, staring at the hieroglyphs on the wall. "The weight grows every day, Kael. The vizier, he is closing in." "Then let him come," Kael said, his hand brushing against the hem of my dress, a touch that could cost him his hand. "We are alive, Amara. That is more than he can say for himself. He is a walking corpse wrapped in ambition." "I am afraid," I confessed, the mask slipping. "The Assyrians come in 3 days. My father is weak." "Look at me," he commanded softly. I risked a glance. His eyes were the color of the Nile during the flood, dark, turbulent, and full of life. "They can chain my body, and they can sell you to a king," Kael said in tense quietness. "But they cannot own what is in here." He tapped his chest. "Run away with me." "Tonight! To the delta, then across the sea." "It is death if we are caught," I said, my heart pounding. "It is death if we stay," he countered. "A slow death of the soul. Which do you choose?" Before I could answer, Beck returned, wiping sweat from his brow. Kael instantly shifted, becoming invisible, just another slave blending into the stone, but the heat of his words remained branded on my skin. The ride back to the palace was a blur. I sat in the chariot, the wind whipping my hair, but my mind was far away, drifting over the horizon that Kael spoke of. It is strange, isn't it? To have the world at your feet, to have servants bathe you in milk and feed you grapes, and yet to envy the bird that flies over the garden wall. We think of history as grand movements of armies and gods, but often it turns on the smallest of hinges, a look, a whisper, a sudden realization that the cage is open, if you only dare to fly. I looked out across the Nile, the lifeline of our civilization. It stretched endlessly, a ribbon of blue cutting through the gold of the desert. I wondered about the people who lived beyond the cataracts, beyond the great green sea. I wondered if, Thousands of years from now, anyone would understand the choice I was about to make. Before the storm descends and the choice becomes irrevocable, I must ask you, the witness to my confession, from which city and country are you watching my story unfold? Are you free to love who you choose in your land? The sun began to dip below the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and bruised purple. The Red Land, the desert, the place of chaos and death, seemed to be creeping closer to the Black Land, the fertile soil of life. When I arrived at the palace gates, the atmosphere had changed. The lazy quiet of the afternoon was gone, replaced by a frantic energy. Guards were running in formation. Scribes were rushing with scrolls clutched to their chests. Merit was waiting for me at the entrance to the women's quarters. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Amara," she gasped, forgetting all protocol. "You must come. Quickly." "What is it? Is it my father?" The fear for Ramses was instantaneous. "No?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It is the vizier. He has issued a decree in the pharaoh's name." I grabbed her shoulders. "What decree?" "The construction project at the Karnak expansion. He claims there is sedition among the workers, a plot to sabotage the monument." My blood ran cold. "There is no plot. He says he has proof," Merit sobbed. "He has ordered a purge, all the slaves from the northern sector. They are to be moved to the gold mines of Nubia at dawn to break their spirits." The northern sector, Kael's sector. The gold mines were a death sentence. No one returned from Nubia. They were worked until they dropped, their bodies left for the jackals. It wasn't just a reassignment. It was an execution. And then the second blow fell. And Amara. Merit's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. The vizier announced that to ensure the safety of the dynasty during this time of unrest, your betrothal to the Assyrian prince will be sealed tonight. You are confined to your chambers until the ceremony. The world tilted. The air left the room. Paser didn't just suspect. He knew. This was his move on the chessboard. He was separating me from Kael, sending my love to die in the scorching south, while locking me in a political marriage that would strip me of any power to save him. I stood in the center of my room, surrounded by the painted scenes of paradise on the walls, and felt the walls closing in. The normal world of silent obedience and stolen glances was gone. It had been shattered by a scribe's pen. I could stay in my room. I could let them dress me in bridal linen. I could let Kael die in the mines, mourning him in secret for the rest of my miserable, queenly life. That was what Ma'at demanded. That was what a good daughter would do. I looked at the dagger resting on my vanity table, a small ornamental thing with a hilt of gold. It was meant for cutting fruit. I picked it up. The blade was sharp. "Merit," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, hard, hollow, and undeniably resolved. "Yes, my lady?" "Find me a cloak, rough wool, something a servant would wear." Merit's eyes widened in horror. "My lady, the guards are at the door. You cannot leave. If you are caught..." "If I stay, Amara dies anyway." I turned to her, the golden uraeus on my brow catching the last dying light of the sun. "Tonight, I am not the pharaoh's daughter. Tonight, I am a woman who will burn this kingdom down before she lets them take him." The sun had set. The act of reaction had begun. The rough wool of the servant's cloak scratched against my skin, a foreign sensation compared to the caress of silk. I felt exposed, not because I was nearly naked beneath the coarse fabric, but because I had shed the armor of my station. Without the crown, without the gold, I was just a woman trembling in the dark. "Stay here," I whispered to Merit. "If anyone comes, say I am praying to Isis for fertility and must not be disturbed. Scream if you have to." Merit nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew the penalty for aiding a traitor. I was asking her to risk her life for my heart. I kissed her forehead, a gesture no mistress gives a slave. and slipped behind the heavy tapestry depicting the Battle of Kadesh. There was a narrow passage there, a priest's walk built into the palace walls for servants to move unseen. It smelled of dry rot and ancient dust. I moved blindly, my hands grazing the rough limestone, counting the steps. Left at the draft of cool air. Down the spiral. Hold your breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the floorboards above sounded like Paser's voice. I wasn't just breaking a rule, I was breaking the divine order. I was descending from the celestial sphere of the Pharaoh into the mud of the earth. I emerged into the cool night air near the kitchen gardens. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky, offering little light. Perfect for thieves and lovers. The city of Thebes did not sleep. It merely lowered its voice. I kept my head down, pulling the hood over my face, mimicking the hurried, hunched walk of a scullery maid late for her shift. I passed patrols of Medjay guards, their torches casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping demons. They were laughing, talking about the bonus gold the vizier had promised for extra vigilance tonight. "Paser is tightening the noose," one guard grumbled, spitting on the ground near my sandaled feet. "He says there are spies from the Hittites in the city." "Spies?" the other laughed. "He just wants to make sure the old Pharaoh doesn't wake up while he counts the treasury." I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. Paser was already rewriting the narrative, turning the city into a prison camp under the guise of protection. I reached the slave pens near the northern harbor. It was a place of misery, a sprawling grid of mud brick cells and open pits where the property of the state was stored. The smell hit me first, a pungent mix of unwashed bodies, fear, and excrement. I had no plan, just a dagger and the arrogance of desperation. The main gate was heavily guarded, but I knew the layout. I had reviewed the architectural plans for the harbor expansion with my father months ago. There was a drainage sluice that emptied into the Nile, wide enough for a person to crawl through if the water was low. I waded into the river. The water was black and cold, the mud sucking at my ankles. I prayed the crocodiles were fed and sleeping. I found the grate, rusted and slick with algae. With a grunt of effort that strained every muscle in my back, I pried it loose just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was foul. I crawled through the slime, the darkness absolute, until I saw the faint glow of a torch ahead. I emerged inside the compound, behind a stack of cedar crates. I scanned the cages. There were hundreds of men. How would I find him? "Water!" a voice croaked nearby. "For the love of Ammon, water!" I moved closer to the central holding pit, the place reserved for the troublemakers scheduled for the mines. And there, illuminated by the flickering torchlight of a sleeping guard, I saw him. Kael was not sleeping. He was standing, gripping the iron bars of the pit, looking up at the stars. Even in chains, stripped of everything, he looked like a king. I picked up a pebble and tossed it. It clattered near his feet. He didn't flinch. I tossed another. He looked toward the shadows. "Kael," I whispered, the sound barely carrying over the wind. His eyes widened. He moved to the bars, his chains rattling softly. "Amara? You are mad. Go back." I stepped into the light, lowering my hood. "I told you. Tonight I burn the kingdom." I rushed to the sleeping guard. He was a heavy man, smelling of sour beer. The keys hung from his belt. My hand hovered over the dagger. Could I do it? Could I take a life? The daughter of the Pharaoh commands armies to kill, but she does not dirty her hands. For him I will. I didn't have to. I cut the leather thong holding the keys and caught them before they hit the ground. I scrambled to the pit. The lock was stiff, rusted by the river damp. "Hurry!" Kael hissed, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "The shift changes at the moon's zenith." The lock clicked. The gate groaned. Kael slipped out, grabbing my arm to steady me. His touch was electric, grounding me in the chaos. "We cannot go to the delta," he said urgently. They have blocked the river traffic for the Assyrians. The harbor is sealed." "Then where?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. My plan had ended at "get him out." "The West Bank," he said, looking across the river to the land of the dead. "The necropolis. The workers' village near the Valley of the Kings. I have friends there. Stonecutters who hate the vizier. They can hide us in the tombs until the search moves north." "Hide in the tombs?" I shuddered. To dwell among the spirits was taboo. "Better the dead than the vizier," he said grimly. We moved toward the harbor wall, but fate, it seemed, was not done with us. A torch flared to life atop the watchtower. A horn blasted. A deep, mournful sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Prisoner escape! Sector 4!" The sleeping guard behind us stirred, blinking. He saw the empty pit. He saw us. "Halt!" he screamed, fumbling for his Kopesh sword. Kael didn't hesitate. He spun, swinging the heavy chain that still bound his wrists. It struck the guard in the temple with a sickening crack. The man crumpled. "Run!" Kael pulled me. We sprinted toward the docks. Shouts erupted all around us. The rhythmic pounding of boots on stone grew louder. Arrows began to hiss through the air. Thwip, thwip, one striking a crate inches from my head. We reached a small fishing skiff tied to a rotting post. Kael practically threw me in and slashed the rope with the guard's dropped sword. He pushed off, jumping in as the skiff drifted into the current. We were on the water, but we were exposed. "Get down!" Kael covered me with his body as a volley of arrows splashed into the water around us. I looked back at the shore. The harbor was swarming with lights. And there, standing on the high dock, illuminated by the torches of his elite guard, was Paser. He wasn't looking at the slaves. He was looking directly at the darkness where our boat drifted. He knew. We drifted into the center of the Nile, the current taking us. We were alive, but the reality of our situation crashed down on me. I looked at Kael. He was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. I looked at my hands. They were covered in the grime of the sewer and the blood of the guard. "We didn't escape," I whispered, the adrenaline fading into a cold dread. "No," Kael said, ripping a piece of his loincloth to bind his wound. He looked at me, and his eyes were grave. "We just started a war." We were not free. We were trapped between the living city that wanted to kill us and the silent city of the dead that waited to claim us. The current pulled us inexorably toward the West Bank, where the shadows of the pyramids loomed like judges. The reaction was over. I had acted, and because of my action, the world was now on fire. The Nile is not just a river, it is a border. On the east bank, where the sun rises, there is noise, markets, the smell of roasting duck, and the pulse of the living. On the west bank, where the sun dies each evening, there is only the silence of stone and the judgment of Osiris. We dragged the skiff into a patch of tall reeds, the mud sucking at our sandals with a greedy sound. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, not just from the exertion, but from the crushing weight of where we were. The necropolis. A city of millions, all of them dead. To walk here at night, without the protective rituals of the priesthood, was to invite the Ak, the angry spirits, to latch onto your soul. "Keep your head down," Kael whispered, gripping my hand. His palm was rough, warm, and utterly alive. It was the only tether keeping me from screaming. "The patrols don't like to come deep into the valley after dark. They fear the ghosts more than the vizier." "And you?" I asked, stumbling over a rock. "Do you not fear them?" He stopped, turning to look at the silhouette of the Theban peaks, jagged against the stars. "I fear men, Amara. Spirits only hurt you if you owe them something. I have paid my debts." We climbed the arid slopes, avoiding the main causeway used for funeral processions. The landscape was alien, a lunar world of limestone cliffs and deep, shadowed canyons. Jackals howled in the distance, a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. Anubis is watching. We reached the workers' village, Deir el Medina, nestled in a valley hidden from the river. It was quiet, the mud brick houses dark. These were the men who built the tombs of the kings, artisans, painters, stonecutters. They were a guild unto themselves, keepers of the Pharaoh's secrets. Kael moved with the confidence of a cat, leading me to a small structure on the outskirts. He knocked a rhythmic pattern on the wooden door. 3 soft taps, 1 hard thud. A moment later, the door creaked open. An old man with a face like dried leather peered out, holding a flickering oil lamp. He squinted, then his eyes went wide. "Kael?" he hissed. "By the gods, boy, the whole valley is awake. They say a demon stole a boat from the harbor." "No demon, Beckett. Just a man who wants to live." Kael pushed me gently into the room. "We need shelter, just for a few hours." Beckett looked at me. He took in the torn, wet servant's cloak, but then his eyes caught the glint of gold I had forgotten to remove, the royal bracelet of the House of Ramses. He gasped, dropping to his knees. "Great royal wife, daughter of the sun." "Stand up," I commanded, my voice trembling. "Here, I am just a fugitive. Does your loyalty lie with the vizier or with the truth?" Beckett looked at Kael, then back at me. "My loyalty lies with the stone, my lady." And Kael saved my son from a collapse in the quarry last inundation. "Come, the house is not safe. The Medjay will search here first." He led us out the back, up a goat path toward an unfinished tomb cut into the cliffside. It was a tomb of the nobles, intended for a wealthy merchant, but abandoned halfway through construction due to a shift in the rock. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dry earth. Beckett gave us the lamp, a loaf of hard bread, and a water skin. "I will watch the path. If I whistle like a kite, you run deeper into the caves." When he left, the silence descended. Kael and I sat on the stone floor, the single flame casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The walls were half-painted, figures of gods and men frozen in the middle of rituals. I looked at Kael. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in my chest. He was washing the blood from his arm with a rag. "Let me," I said softly. I took the rag. My hands, usually manicured and perfumed, were stained with mud. As I cleaned the wound, I felt the tension in his muscles. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you look at me that day in the temple? You knew it would lead to this." He looked at me, his eyes intense in the lamplight. "Because I saw a prisoner, just like me. You wore gold chains, I wore iron ones, but we were both walking in a circle drawn by someone else." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "Amara, I didn't plan to fall in love with a goddess, but when you looked back, you made me remember who I was before the chains." I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. For a moment, we weren't a princess and a slave. We were just 2 heartbeats in the dark. I kissed him, a desperate, terrifying kiss that tasted of dust and fear. It was a seal, a promise that there was no going back. I had traded a kingdom for this man, and in that moment, in the cold tomb, I knew I would do it again. But the moment was shattered by a sound. Voices, not outside, but inside the tomb complex. Kael extinguished the lamp instantly. We were plunged into absolute darkness. "The resonance shaft," Kael whispered in my ear. "Voices carry from the lower chambers. Someone is down there." We crept forward, feeling our way along the wall toward a ventilation shaft cut by the workers. The voices became clearer. "The dosage must be increased," a voice said. I froze. I knew that voice. It was smooth, cold, and undeniably familiar. "Paser. He is strong as an ox," a second voice replied, a rasping, nervous voice I recognized as the high priest of Sekhmet, the chief physician. "The wolfsbane is working, but slowly. If we give him too much, The symptoms will mimic poison. It must look like a failure of the heart. We do not have time for subtlety, Paser snapped. The Assyrians are here. I need Ramses bedridden and delirious by the festival. I need the Regency Council to grant me full executive power to sign the treaty. Once the treaty is signed, the Pharaoh can succumb to his grief. My blood turned to ice. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. "And the girl?" the physician asked. "The Princess Amara?" "She is gone," Paser laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Run off with a slave, a convenient scandal. It delegitimizes her claim completely. Even if she returns, she is ruined. No one will follow a whore who beds with livestock." "But she administered the drafts," the physician noted. "Every night." "Exactly," Paser said. "If questions arise, who do you think will be blamed? The grieving daughter who gave her father his medicine every night, or the loyal vizier who tried to save him? She is not just a fugitive, priest. She is the perfect scapegoat." The world spun. I grabbed Kael's arm to keep from falling. The medicine. The bitter tonic I had prepared with my own hands every evening for the last 6 months. Paser had given me the ingredients, claiming they were rare herbs from Punt to strengthen the heart. I have been poisoning my own father. Every loving cup I brought him, every time I smoothed his brow and urged him to drink, I was killing him. I was the weapon Paser used to murder the king. The voices faded as they moved deeper into the lower crypt to inspect their stash. I slumped against the wall, the horror clawing at my throat. "I killed him," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, hot and fast. "Kael, I killed him. He's dying because of me." Kael grabbed my shoulders, shaking me hard. "No, you didn't know. You were deceived." "It doesn't matter," I hissed, the grief turning into a sudden, blinding rage. "I ran away. I ran away to save myself and you, leaving him alone with that monster. Paser has the treaty, he has the throne, and he has my father's life in his hands." I looked at the darkness where the voices had come from. The fear that had driven me across the river was gone. In its place was something cold and hard, like the obsidian blade of a sacrificial knife. "We can't go to the coast," I said, my voice steady now. "What?" Kael looked at me, confused. "Amara, the boat is gone. We have to find another way north." "No," I stood up. The servant's cloak felt heavy, but I stood as tall as if I were wearing the double crown. "If we run, Paser wins. My father dies. Egypt falls to the Assyrians, and I go down in history as the patricide who abandoned her people for a lover." "Amara, if we go back, we die," Kael warned. "There is a bounty on our heads." "Then we must be worth the price," I said, turning to him. "Paser thinks I am a ruined girl running from her shame. He thinks I am weak." I reached into my sash and pulled out the golden dagger I had taken from my room. Even in the dark, I knew it was sharp. "He forgot one thing, Kael. I am the daughter of Ramses. I have the blood of warriors in my veins." I looked toward the exit of the tomb. "We aren't running anymore. We are going back to Thebes. I am going to save my father. And then, I am going to kill the vizier." The point of no return had been crossed. The girl who fled the palace was dead. The woman who returned would be a queen, or she would be a corpse. The return to Thebes was a journey through the underworld. We didn't walk as lovers or fugitives. We moved as ghosts. Kael knew the service tunnels beneath the city, old aquifers drained dry years ago, that led directly to the temple complex adjacent to the palace. The air in the tunnels was thick with the smell of stagnant water and decay. We moved in silence, the weight of my realization crushing the air from my lungs. I poisoned him. The thought circled in my mind like a vulture. Every stumbling step I took was an act of penance. "We need a distraction," Kael whispered as we reached a grate looking up into the Temple of Ammon. Above us, the chanting of the night priests had ceased. "The guards will be doubled at the royal wing." I know the layout, I replied, my voice sounding hollow. There is a hidden door behind the statue of Sekhmet in the infirmary. It connects to my father's private chambers. It's how the physicians come and go unseen. If Paser is there, Kael started, checking the grip on the stolen khopesh. He will be, I said. He is watching his investment die. We emerged into the temple shadows. The massive stone columns provided cover as we slipped toward the palace connection. The palace was not sleeping. It was holding its breath. Servants rushed with heads bowed low, whispering about the traitor princess. The narrative had already taken root. I wasn't Amara the beloved. I was Amara the pariah. We incapacitated a lone guard near the infirmary entrance. Kael moved with a terrifying efficiency, choking him into unconsciousness before dragging him into the shadows. I watched, numb. Violence was now the currency of my survival. We reached the statue of Sekhmet. The lion-headed goddess glared down at us in the flickering torchlight. I pressed the hidden lever in the stone lotus at her feet. The wall groaned and slid open. The smell of sickness hit me instantly. It was the smell of rotting sweet fruit, the scent of a body failing. We stepped into the pharaoh's bedchamber. The room was dim, lit only by alabaster lamps. In the center, on a bed of gold and ivory, lay Ramses the Great. He looked small. The man who had choked lions with his bare hands was now a skeleton wrapped in fine linen. His breathing was a ragged rattle. I rushed to his side, ignoring the danger. "Father," I whispered, taking his hand. It was cold. His eyelids fluttered. "Amara," he rasped, his voice a dry leaf. "They said you ran?" "I am here," I choked out, tears blurring my vision. "I am here. I didn't know. The medicine." So touching. The voice came from the shadows near the balcony. Kael spun around, raising the sword, but it was too late. From behind the curtains, a dozen Medjay guards emerged, bows drawn and aimed directly at Kael's chest. Paser stepped into the light. He wore the leopard skin of a high priest over his vizier's robes. He looked immaculate, calm, and utterly victorious. "I expected you to run to the Delta, Princess," Paser said, tilting his head. "But I hoped you would be foolish enough to return. You always did have a sentimental heart. It is your greatest weakness." "You snake!" I screamed, standing between the guards and my father's bed. "You poisoned him. You used me to do it." "I merely hastened the inevitable," Paser shrugged. "Egypt needs a strong ruler, not a dying old man, and certainly not a girl who sullies her bloodline with slaves." He snapped his fingers. 2 guards lunged at Kael. Kael fought. He slashed the first guard across the chest. But there were too many. A heavy mace struck him from behind. "No!" I shrieked as Kael hit the floor. Blood pooled around his head on the pristine white stone. They dragged him up, dazed and bleeding, forcing him to his knees. A blade was pressed to his throat. "Don't!" I begged, falling to my knees. "Please, take the crown. Take the throne. Just let him go." Paser laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "You still think this is a negotiation? You have nothing to trade, Amara. You are a regicide, a traitor." He turned to the bed where my father watched, his eyes wide with helpless horror. "See, great Pharaoh," Paser said softly. "Your daughter has returned, but not to save you. She brought her lover to finish the job, to slice your throat so they could usurp the throne." "Liar," I screamed. "Who will they believe?" Paser asked, spreading his hands. "The loyal vizier, or the girl caught in the room with a weapon and a dead guard outside?" He looked at the captain of the guard. "Take the slave to the courtyard. Execute him at sunrise in front of the assembled court. Let the people see what happens to those who touch the royal house." "And her?" the captain asked, nodding at me. Paser looked at me with cold disdain. "Lock her in the tower. She will watch her lover die first. Then..." We will have a trial, a short one. Kael! I reached for him as they dragged him away. His eyes were groggy, but he found mine. Live, Amara, he mouthed. Fight! And then the heavy doors slammed shut. The tower room was a circle of stone high above the palace. There was no furniture, only a straw mat and a window with iron bars. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The silence was absolute. This was the end. I had failed. I had not saved my father. I had only accelerated his pain. I had not saved Kael. I had led him into a trap that would end his life. Paser had won. He had written the story, and I was just a character he was writing out of existence. I closed my eyes and saw Kael's blood on the floor. I saw my father's terrified eyes. The darkness inside me was heavier than the stone walls. It whispered that I should have used the dagger on myself in the bedroom. It whispered that I was cursed. You are nothing, the voice said. Just a spoiled child playing at rebellion. I looked out the window. Below, the torches of the palace flickered. To the east, a faint gray line marked the horizon. The sun was coming. Ra was returning to be born again. But for me, the sunrise meant death. It meant the sound of a sword falling on Kael's neck. I wept until I had no tears left. I sat in the hollow emptiness of my grief. And then, in the silence, I heard a sound. Not a voice from outside, but a memory. It was my father's voice from years ago, when he taught me to drive a chariot. The horses will sense your fear, Amara. If you panic, you crash. If you freeze, you die. You must look past the danger. Look at where you want to go. I looked at the horizon again. Paser thought he had stripped me of everything. He had taken my crown, my reputation, my love, and my freedom. But he had made a mistake. By stripping me of everything, he had left me with nothing to lose. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood. I wasn't the princess anymore. I wasn't the lover. I was the daughter of Ramses. I was the blood of the lion. I walked to the door. It was solid oak, bound in iron, locked. I looked at the window. The bars were thick, but the wall. The stone around the window frame was old. The mortar was crumbling. I remembered the architectural reports. Paser had diverted funds from palace maintenance to build his own statues. I went to the window and dug my fingers into the mortar. It was hard, but it flaked. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have an army. I had my bare hands and the rage of a woman who had lost everything. Live. Fight. I would not watch Kael die. I dug until my fingernails broke and my fingers bled. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the cold, burning clarity of purpose. I would get out of this tower. I would get to the courtyard. And I would stop the sun itself if I had to. The night was at its darkest, but the eclipse was ending. The stone gave way with a sickening crunch, taking 2 of my fingernails with it. I didn't feel it. I felt only the vibration of the drums rising from the courtyard below, the dum-dum-dum of the executioner's march. I squeezed through the narrow gap I had created, the rough limestone tearing my tunic and scraping my skin raw. I hung suspended 40 feet above the palace grounds, clinging to the decorative ivy that clung to the tower. Below, the dawn was bleeding into the sky, casting a red light over the assembled court, the silent army, and the solitary block where Kael knelt. I slid down, the vines burning my palms, landing in a heap behind the colonnade. I was bruised, bleeding, and covered in dust. I looked nothing like a princess. I looked like a fury birthed from the earth. I grabbed a spear from a rack, the wood heavy and solid in my hands. "Behold the traitor!" Paser's voice boomed across the courtyard. He stood on the dais, the gold of his stolen authority glittering. "He sought to steal the throne. He corrupted the princess. The penalty is death." The executioner raised the heavy bronze axe. Kael didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the tower window, thinking I was still watching. Stop! My scream tore through the silence, louder than the drums, sharper than the axe. I stepped out from the shadows, dragging the spear. The crowd gasped. A ripple of shock went through the ranks of the Medjay guards. They saw the blood on my hands, the wildness in my eyes. They didn't see a girl. They saw the daughter of Ramses. Amara? Paser faltered, his mask of calm cracking for a fraction of a second. Seize her! She is mad! Do not touch me! I swung the spear, the iron tip carving a line in the dirt. I am Amara, blood of the 19th dynasty, and I accuse the Vizier Paser of regicide. The guards hesitated. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. She is hysterical, Paser sneered, descending the steps, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. She helped the slave poison her father. Kill them both, now! Check the king's cup, I shouted to the high priest standing nearby. Check the dregs of the medicine Paser brewed. It is wolfsbane and crushed glass. I have the records from the physicians he bribed. It was a bluff. I had no records, but the specificity of the lie struck true. Paser realized he was losing control. The army was not moving. The people were watching. He snarled, abandoning the pretense of law. He drew his dagger and lunged at me, a desperate, striking viper. Die, you little wretch! I raised the spear, but I was not a warrior. He batted it aside, his momentum crashing into me. We fell to the hard stone. His hands were around my throat, squeezing, his eyes bulging with murderous intent. I will build a new Egypt on your bones, he hissed, his spittle hitting my face. My vision blurred. Black spots danced before my eyes. I clawed at his face, but he was too strong. Then a roar shook the ground. Kael. He had surged upward, snapping the wooden brace of the execution block with the sheer, impossible strength of adrenaline. With his hands still bound, he threw himself at Paser, tackling him off me. They rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs and robes. Paser slashed wildly with the dagger, cutting Kael's arm, but Kael didn't stop. He headbutted the vizier, a sickening crack echoing through the courtyard, and pinned him down. For the Pharaoh, Kael growled, pressing his forearm against Paser's throat. Wait, I gasped, scrambling to my feet. I picked up the dagger Paser had dropped. Kael looked at me, his chest heaving, holding the traitor down. The guards had encircled us, spears leveled, waiting for a command. I walked over to Paser. He looked up at me, terror finally replacing the arrogance. Mercy, he wheezed. Amara. Mercy. Mercy is for the innocent, I said, my voice cold and steady. Ma'at demands balance. I didn't kill him. I turned to the captain of the guard. Arrest this man for treason against the crown, and bring the physicians to my father's chamber, now. The captain looked at Paser, then at me. He slammed his fist against his chest. Yes, your majesty. Paser was dragged away, screaming. I dropped the dagger. I fell to my knees beside Kael. He was bleeding, battered, but alive. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see the girl he wanted to save. He saw the queen who had just risen. You didn't run, he whispered. I told you, I touched his face, mixing my blood with his. I am burning the kingdom down, to build a better one. We had won, but as the sun fully rose over the walls of Thebes, illuminating the carnage, I knew the price had just begun to be paid. My father died 3 days later. The poison had done its work, but he died knowing the truth, his hand in mine. They buried him in the Valley of the Kings, and I ascended the throne of Egypt. I stand now on the same balcony where this story began. I wear the double crown. I hold the crook and flail. The people cheer for Pharaoh Amara, the warrior queen, the savior of the dynasty. They do not know the girl who wept in the tomb. They only know the mask of gold I wear. And Kael? He stands behind me, always in the shadow, clad in the armor of the general of the armies. We did not marry. I could not make a slave a king without tearing the country apart. Civil war would have destroyed the very people we fought to save. So, I made a choice. I chose power, not for vanity, but for survival. I chose the title so that no one could ever hurt us again. We live a paradox. In the eyes of the world, I am the solitary goddess, and he is my loyal servant. But in the quiet of the night, when the heavy doors are barred and the crowns are removed, the hierarchy dissolves. We are just Amara and Kael. We paid for our lives with our freedom to love in the light. It is a heavy price. Sometimes, looking at the Nile, I wonder if the girl who wanted to run away to the Delta was the wiser one. But then I look at him, safe, alive, and strong, and I know I would burn the world 1,000 times over to keep him breathing. I am a prisoner of my own power, but at least inside this gilded cage, I am not alone. Thank you for witnessing my reign. If my journey moved you, please subscribe and leave a like to honor the history we wrote together today.